Okay, we're back with the interview of Todd Webb, part 2, where we see as Todd starts really getting into comics, he starts doing diary comics, which I think are super interesting. And by the end, the two of us have met, and we're starting to talk about Mr. Toast stuff. So here's part 2. Take it away. Okay, I'm back with Todd. When we left, you were talking about the Museum of Pictures and Images in Massachusetts. Words and Pictures, and so what happened with that?
Well, it was a it was a nonprofit organization, and they just didn't bring in enough money to stay open, despite Kevin pouring in as much as he could, and so eventually it just went away, which was it was heartbreaking to witness that place close, because there's really has been nothing like it since. It was an amazing place. I feel really blessed to have been able to experience that and glean all that knowledge from people so early.
Yeah, it is sad. Okay, so you're fired up. You're doing all these books. You're selling them just in that store, or are you getting them out there into more stores?
I was selling them in the gift shop there. I was giving them to all of the visiting artists. And so I would get, like there's a Bobby Doodle, like there's one that they would get little quotes, like they would write me little blurbs on them. So like there was like a Bobby Doodle with a blurb from like Kevin Smith, who was at that time running, like writing, what was it, like Daredevil or something. Like he was writing one of the Marvel books or something, so like Clerks had already made him famous and stuff. So it was like weird stuff like that. But on these little 25-cent crappy mini comics that have blurbs from these really like actually established people. So I was given anything that I had. I would bring sketchbooks. I would show to all those artists. I would talk to all those artists. I remember I sat down with Joe Kubert and Will Eisner, both of them at separate times, but
yeah,
because Joe had the school, which was the only all comic school, again geared towards mainstream stuff. But I was like, this guy runs the school. I can talk to him directly right now. And so I remember sitting down, and he gave me a full half hour of his time and looked through my stuff, and he drew. I have a drawing somewhere that Joe literally drew, because I was using whatever crappy pens and markers I had laying around. And Joe was like, well, you got to learn how to use a brush, and you got to get a dip pen. And I have a drawing that he did of different nibs.
Oh my God.
A drawing of different pen nibs and stuff that he recommended. And I never figured out how to use a pen nib properly. I suck. But I did use a brush for a long time. And I got better at using it. And then when those Faber-Castell brush pens started being available, I switched over to those. So that's all my inking's done with one of those now. So it's the middle ground between a pen and a brush.
It's a brush. It's a brush because you have control.
But that, and they sponsored me at one point. Faber-Castell sent me a box of hundreds of those brushes, because I was telling them, and people kept asking what I was using, and I would always say I use this Faber-Castell brush pen. And so I contacted them and was like, hey, can you guys hook me up? Because I'm literally just telling everybody to use your products. And it was on my website even, ink with Faber-Castell pens. And they literally sent me 500 brush pens at one point. So I had them for a couple of years for free. But yeah, so I would give them to all the artists, and I would mail them to artists. I was reading, Mark Crilly had a comic book through Sirius called Akiko. He was an English teacher. He was from America. He was an English teacher in Japan, and a way that he would keep the kids in his class interested in learning English was at the end of every week he would draw a comic book page, and they'd have to read it. And Akiko and her friends were the characters that he created, and then he ended up doing that as a comic book, and it ran for 50 issues or something.
Oh wow!
And I loved Akiko, and so that was one of the indie books that I was real into. And he does children's books and like young adult novels and stuff now. Like he's full-time artist, dude.
Hmm.
And I think he has some crazy like YouTube career of like drawing tutorials and stuff too. Because the dude can draw. But I would send stuff to him, you know, like I would send comics to Mark. I would send like any of the books that I was reading where there was like contacts, you know, like Sarah, like I had met her in Evan, so like I remember like I sent Sarah one, and then she wrote about Stockboy and Action Girl comic, and like she had a review section called Comics by Boys, and I was one of the ones that she wrote about, and then I got orders from that, like mail order stuff, and I set up a website really early on. I had a GeoCities website, which I still remember the URL was geocities.com/Athens/Troy/1442.
What?
Yeah, because they were set up to do, they were free websites, but they would put you in these weird zones based on what you did, you know. So it's like when you set up, you'd say like I'm an artist, and it'd be like, what kind of art do you do? And like so you'd end up in this. So like I guess Athens and Troy was probably comic people, you know, something like that, some weird thing. And then in you know, in like 2000 or something, I bought toddbot.com.
Oh, okay.
So I had that for 20 years. But so I was putting stuff on GeoCities, you know, like 98 probably.
Oh, wow.
98,
Okay.
like really early internet.
Yeah.
I had a presence on there, and my little publishing company was called Cornerstone Comics, and I would all my mini comics had anything that I made had this, you know, Cornerstone Comics logo and stuff, and so like all of my minis were through that, and I would get orders off of that, and then I started finding out about Tim Corrigan had a little zine thing called Small Press Comics Explosion, and it was kind of like you remember like Fact Sheet 5?
What was Fact Sheet 5?
Like
That was a music thing.
Well, it was a magazine about zines, and it was like people could order. It was basically a magazine distro. So it's like they would review stuff, and they'd have ordering information and things.
And it would just be photocopied, right? It was just sort of a floppy photocopy thing, or was it a magazine?
It became a magazine at some point.
Okay.
But so this was like, you know, pre-internet world connections, and like so John P. was doing King Cat, you know, and all that. So like he was one of the first. John Porcelino was one of the first like zine comics people that I found out about. Instantly loved his stuff because of how pure and clean, like it just looked nice and simple on a page, and it was about these like little daily things. So then I was like, you really can do comics about anything, you know, like anything. And Matt Fizel was doing Cynical Man, and I don't remember how I found Matt, but that was like, I think Matt told me about Small Press Comics Explosion that Tim Corrigan was doing, and Matt was just writing about mini comics. Like Small Press Comics Explosion was all mini comic reviews. So I'd send my stuff to them, and they would do a little blurb with a picture of the cover and like a review and how to get a copy, you know, send 50 cents to Todd Webb, whatever. And I would get mail orders. And so I started trading comics with all these like other mini comics people through the mail. And yeah, so that's where my stuff was going. I was just sending it out to people and selling it through the mail.
And when did you start doing conventions?
Conventions was 99.
Okay, so you're doing conventions during all this too.
Well, yeah, that happened. So this is where Harold enters the picture.
Oh, okay.
Kind of, because there was one of the other things that I found was the Sci-Fi Channel had this Canadian TV show called The Anti-Gravity Room.
Okay, I think you've told me about this before.
Yeah, it was hosted by like, you know, like teenage kids in Canada, and they would talk about comic books and movies and video games, and they would interview people, you know, like that had stuff to do with those things. And Harold was on that show for Apathy Cat, which, for people who don't know, let's get Harold plugged. This was Harold. Harold Buckles,
Buckles.
my main man. This was his comic book through Entity Comics at the time, called Apathy Cat. Weirdly enough, there's a Hall of Heroes advertisement for Snowman, this really bad horror comic, which was like, that's Matt Martin, the kid from the Christian magazine. and check this out. Variant cover by Trent Kanuga.
Okay.
This is advertised on Harold's comic. Like, that's Worlds Colliding. I don't think I ever noticed that until right now. That's bonkers. So Harold was on Anti-Gravity Room because of Apathy Cat.
Yeah.
And you've got to interview Harold, because his story about being on that show, like he was flown out to LA, and I think he was interviewed in like Forrest Ackerman's mansion. Like,
what?
It's crazy. So
he was in the Act Mansion.
Yeah, the Act Cave. So I saw Harold on that show, and then I went, and I would search for indie comics, and like people that looked interesting on there, I would check and see if they had a website. And Harold had a website, but it wasn't really for Apathy Cat. It was for Harold Buckles Print Services, which was the first version of his not publishing, but his like printing company that he had. And his thing was doing all ages comics in runs of like 100.
It was down to 100. I didn't remember that. Okay.
Which was like unheard of.
It's crazy.
Like, for people that don't know, if you wanted to self-publish like an actual comic that looked like this, or it's close to this, you'd have to order like 1,000 or more to make it worth doing.
Or 2,500, or
And it wasn't cheap to do.
No.
So it was like you had to gamble on what you were making to do it. And Harold found a couple of printers, and he was kind of acting as a like a middleman, kind of like a broker to connect people that were doing all ages comics with a way to get their stuff in print. And so I found that, and I was like, oh, that's the guy that I saw on the TV show. That's crazy.
Together.
And so then I think Kat Garza actually made his website, or John Gallagher or somebody. And so like I sent an email to Harold, and told him who I was and everything, and he wrote me back like a really sweet email, and like he ended up sending me like some samples of books that he printed, and so this was when I was starting to think about doing something like real, and then the story gets weirder, because we're still in Windsor, Connecticut. Harold at the time he lived here in Virginia Beach with his wife Diane. My uncle David, my dad's brother, when he was around, he lived in Norfolk, Virginia, which is 20 minutes from here, and he worked with Diane. Like, they worked together. And they were friends, and like, because Uncle David was playing music all the time, and Diane's a music fan, and they would trade like mixes and stuff, and like they were like work buds,
It's so weird.
And it's insane. And so I remember talking to Uncle David on the phone, and he, at this time I was interested in music, but I wasn't thinking about performing music or playing. I wasn't making music at all. But I was, I remember telling him about that I was getting more and more into comics and stuff. And he said, oh, I have a friend who her husband does comic books. You should talk to him. His name's Harold. And he couldn't remember Harold's last name. And I said, it's not Buckles, is it? And he said, yeah, how do you know that? And it was just like this insane. Yeah. And it also was funny because like, he was saying like, man, comic books, that's even harder to get into than music. It's like,
kind of is.
I do both of them now, but yeah. So then I started corresponding with Harold, and he was telling me about the Small Press Expo in Bethesda, Maryland.
Sure.
And I wanted to go, and my parents, you know, oh, and at this time on the internet, I had connected with some artists in Texas. My friend Toby Craig had a comic book called Engine, like a little anthology that he was doing with his friends. And there's the other people, it was Todd Gale and Dalton Webb. And
What?
his name was Toby, and we had a cat named Toby. And so I had emailed him and been like, hey, I just feel like I should send you something because like my name's connected with all of you guys. And so we became like internet friends. I didn't meet I didn't know them because they were in Texas, you know, but like, so I printed a comic in one of the Engine anthologies that they were doing. And so that's how I found out. Toby invited me to go to SPX because he was like,
Okay.
we're getting a table at this show. You should come. And I told my parents I wanted to go. And I think I might have, 99 was the year I graduated. So I was just out of high school or
So this
just
is
about,
99. Okay.
yeah. And I hadn't really gone out of town on my own yet. And I didn't know anybody. And I was like, you know, my parents, this was like early internet days. So that, you know, this was like, the fear was like, your son's going
Chalked up.
out of town to stay in a hotel with a strange man that he doesn't know for comic books. You know, like, that's what it sounds like to parents.
Sure.
You know? To me, I'm like, this is a great opportunity. And they're like, well, if we'd feel more comfortable if there was somebody that you know there. And so then I was like, well, Harold's going. But they're like,
Oh,
well,
okay.
we don't know Harold either, but we know your uncle knows who he, you know, he's a real person. You know, it's like there was like a connection. And so I started talking to Harold about it, and his Harold's sister lived up in Massachusetts, and so like they were going to drive up to visit his sister, and he's like, well, why don't I stop by and I can
Oh,
meet
wow.
all you guys. And so my parents got to meet him, and I got to meet him, and we talked about comic books, and you know, he looked through my portfolio and stuff. And at this point, you know, like we didn't really know each other yet. We'd been emailing and stuff, and you know, there was like a connection, but it wasn't like you know, I wouldn't say we were friends yet. You know, it's like
Sure.
he was like a professional, and I was like an alkalite. You know, like I was like, show me the ways. You know, and but after that meeting, my parents were like, okay, you know, you can go with Harold, and we'll feel good about it. And so I ended up getting on a train and going down to
Wow.
Bethesda, Maryland, and did my first small press expo in '99 with Harold. Um, and we went down like a day or two before and went to all like the museums in DC because I'd never been to Washington DC.
Oh, wow.
So like we walked around and went, you know, I remember went to the Library of Congress, went you know, nerdy comic book guy stuff. We would go look at things. And went to, there was like a party, like a pre-show party at the comic shop in DC area. I forget what it's called. But I remember like the High Water Books guys were there, like Tom Devlin and James Kolchaka, and like those guys were there. Sam Henderson, I think, was there, who was, I knew from his, not from Magic Whistle, but I knew him from Nickelodeon Magazine. Sam did a strip called Seen But Not Heard. But so I was like geeking out at this comic book shop because I like knew who these people were. And actually I'd met James at, I bet he doesn't even remember this, but the first time I met him was at Words and Pictures.
Okay.
And I went down into the basement. Oh, I forgot all about this. The basement of Words and Pictures. I guess that's where was there like a restroom down there or something? But it was like a staff only zone. You know, like you didn't go back there. But I got to go down with everybody because James was there. I guess he was just there visiting. I don't know. But I knew who he was from. I guess we had just traded mini comics in the mail, and I think there was a Palmer's Picks about James in Wizard too. So it's like I knew who he was, and they were like, "Oh, well, you should come down with us. We're gonna go draw on the walls." And like all of the artists that went to that place drew on the walls down there.
Oh
And I
wow.
drew on the walls with them, and like I wonder if James would remember that. Like it'd probably blow his mind that I was this kid there with him. Since we're always compared to each other for our drawing, but like, yeah. So like I recognized those dudes in the comic shop, and I was just like, oh, that's so. I was like, this is crazy, because the only other comic show I'd ever gone to was like a Hartford, Connecticut, like Comic-Con that had, it was like trading cards and like a bunch of nobodies.
It's all superhero stuff, which
Yeah.
Is what it is.
And Small Press Expo was all this kind of stuff. And so I was like, this is awesome. Did that show. There was a party at that show on, it's like a full weekend. So I can't remember what night the party was, like Saturday night or something. And it was at a cartoonist named John Gallagher, who does a book called Buzzboy. And
okay. Sure.
bunch of other stuff. But so there was a party at John's house, and Harold and John and all those guys were friends. So like I went with them. And I didn't know that crowd at all. But that night I met Art Baltazar was at John's party. Caetano Garza I had met right before that party because of Harold. Cat was one of the first people to blow up doing like web comics, like Infinite Scroll comics, where like you used like Scott McCloud wrote about Cat a lot in Reinventing Comics, the book. Like there's a lot of stuff about Cat in there, but like John Gallagher, Art Baltazar, my friend Jamie Costley, who does like Star Wars comic strips for the Insider magazine now. Jamie was there, George Broderick, and I think maybe Chris Yambar was there too. Small press dudes, but that had their own. Everybody had their own kind of following, and they've all gone on to do crazy stuff. Art especially. So Franco wasn't there, but Art was there, and he was doing Crybaby Adventures at the time was his comic, and who else was at that party? My brain's blanking out. But it was a lot of people that now are like the people that I really look forward to seeing every, like. Sure. Basically, when we do like the Baltimore Comic Con, lots of those people are there. So like that party was hugely influential on making connections and being friends with like-minded people, and those guys were doing all ages comics. Like that was the thing that was different from the rest of the small press crowd. It was like I loved all the other stuff, and I would have given a kidney to be part of like High Water and stuff.
This was more traditional stuff that's story driven for everybody, and not just not hyper experimental work.
Yeah, it wasn't pure art comics. It was like stuff that was kid friendly. It was like there was a little bit of everything. Like Harold's was animals, and like John's was more on the superhero side. But it was friendly stuff, and which is something that I always liked, things that were accessible to everybody. Like I didn't like exclusion, and and so like some of those guys were involved in like the Pittsburgh Comic Con. Like George Broderick lived there, and there would always be a cookout at George's house, and so like that became another thing that I would loop into with Franco and Art, and like Chris Yambar introduced me to the Burger Bomb guys that I did that flip book with, Ken Wheaton and Mike, and so that first SPX was just like a huge deal for me. One, getting to know Toby and everybody, because like Toby and I did that show and some other shows together for several years. We would do conventions together, and getting to meet all of the other guys that I liked their work, and finding all of these crazy comics that like you couldn't just go get at a regular comic shop, from the source too, like getting to talk to people and Ryan Ralph was there. The Jordan Crane was there that year. Like it was just a very
Everybody,
cool, and everybody's gone on and done really interesting work, which is the coolest thing about it. You know, it's just
yeah,
like, I mean, Art Baltazar and Franco, like they have their own universe with, you
they
know,
have their own line of like multiple lines of books at this
they have
point.
their own stores. They have their own comic book stores now. It's awesome. But
Now,
yeah,
so let's get to you starting to work with Harold. How did that come about?
that happened after I graduated and had been doing the comic book shows, and I printed the first version of the Goldfish and Bob through Harold in 2001. Was when that book came out, and that book was originally tiny. Oh, I spilled my pile, so here's one. And the Goldfish and Bob looked like this originally. It was this little tiny square book, and it's got that. You know, this was what the paper, like the books were like laminated kind of on one side,
Yeah.
so together and glued. This one, some of the old books that were printed this way, the spines would pop off after, you know, like a decade or something. But this, you know, they still,
What are you gonna do?
some of them hold together. But so this was like my first long form comic, graphic novel, book, picture story, whatever you want to call it. Um, and yeah, so I printed this through Harold, and I was working at that point at well, some other stuff happened, like the flip book happened and Robot Frank's life happened, and I was going through like a series of day jobs and stuff, work at a video store and a UPS, and I was working at a gas station, and I liked it because it was like a set schedule. It was like Monday through Friday, and it was like 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. And I hated the 6 a.m. part because I was in New England. So like in the winter, that meant getting up at 4 to
Oof.
like shovel the driveway before you could even go to work.
Ugh.
But it was like I had nights and weekends free. So, and I was, I was young, so I had all the energy to do everything at night. So it's like, it was great. And my boss was like, everybody I worked with there was really nice. And my boss was really awesome. And he would let me draw on the job or read on the job because his logic, he wouldn't let anybody else do it, but they'd be like, how come Todd gets to do whatever he wants in between customers? And so we would have these like secret shoppers come in and like grade everybody. And he said I was the only one that always got a perfect score, no matter when they came. And he's like, if you guys all get perfect scores all the time, you can do whatever you want in between customers too. But so at SPX, I had connected. Well, I met Dave Roman and John Green first in Pittsburgh. And Dave got a job at Nickelodeon Magazine as one of the comics editors. And I had always wanted to get into Nickelodeon Magazine, but I didn't want to send stuff. I wrote it off because I was like, well, I've got a friend that works there. I don't want it to look like I'm just using my friend to get in. And so I just went like, well, I guess I won't do that. And then I met Chris Duffy at one of the SPXs, and he gave me his card. And he was the senior editor of the magazine and was like, you should send me stuff. So when I was at the gas station, I was drawing pitches to send to Chris on receipt paper. Like I would draw comics, like pitch ideas on the receipt, and then I get on the train and go into the city and meet with Chris in the Nickelodeon offices, and
Oh.
it was cool. And Dave would give me tours of the town and stuff, and it was super fun times. But so like all of that was going on in Connecticut, and Harold was like, well, if you ever want to have your day job be connected to comic books, I could use some help with the print business because I want some free time to draw.
Oh,
That
okay.
he hadn't been drawing this whole time. He was busy helping other people do their thing, which
He's
Harold is.
trying to put his own business together, and yes.
Well, he's just he's a genius, and one of the areas that Harold is a genius at is in helping other people realize their ideas, and so one of the first incarnations of this was his print business, where he was helping people that wanted to do something that seemed impossible to do, like their books. But that meant he wasn't working on his book. And so he was like, why don't you come down and visit and see if you like the area and if it's something you want to do. And so my friend Ben, who was drawn with me all the time, he was like one of the only real friends I made during the homeschool years, because lots of homeschoolers are just weird, weird people in that circle. And Ben drew, and so like we became really good friends. And he does like cell phone games now. Like he's like a video game, like a lead animator on for a video game company down in Austin now. But like so Ben drove down with me to Virginia Beach to stay with Harold for like a couple of days and get a lay of the land, and visit some other people on the way. So like we stopped at Jamie Costley's house up in Richmond, and we drove up to Baltimore to see Scott Mills, was another indie cartoonist. He had Scott, his first book got one of the Xeric grants from Peter Laird, the other Ninja Turtles guy, who's also in Northampton. So like Kevin used his money to start a museum, and Peter used his to give grants to aspiring cartoonists. So they both tremendously impacted the industry in multiple ways. I don't think they get thanked enough for that. So thank you, Kevin and Peter, because they really helped a lot of people. But so Scott had gotten one of the Xeric grants for a mini comic called Cells, and then I did a 24-hour comic, like Scott McCloud's Challenge, and mine was called Duncan in the Game of Life. And I don't know if I have one of those here, because we were just talking about that the other day too.
Yes.
I don't know. I'm not going to dig through that right now because we're on camera. But like, Duncan in the Game of Life was my 24-hour comic, and it was about this weird dude named Duncan who choked on a chicken bone and had a dream. He had a dream that he was playing. He had a dream that he was playing chess with his dead grandfather, and he won the game and then woke up. Like, so he survived because he won the game.
Life or death.
Yeah, so that that was it. So like he wins and then he coughs up the bone, and then it's like, oh, that was crazy, and that's the end of it. But Scott really liked it, and he wrote about it in and I don't know how he got it, maybe at like Pittsburgh Comic Con or something, but he reviewed it in Indie Magazine, which was like a comics magazine that was out of Gainesville from Alternative Comics, published it, Jeff Mason's company. And so he wrote this really nice blurb, like review of Duncan in the Game of Life. And we started, hi, baby. Mm-hmm. We started corresponding that way. And so we did mini comics together too, Scott and I. Like he would write and I would draw them, or like he would, pencil and I would ink, or I would pencil and he would ink, and stuff like that. So Ben and I drove to Baltimore to see Scott. That's how he entered that picture. So that was cool too, because that was the first time like really going to another cartoonist, seeing their studio,
seeing their whole setup.
Yeah, like at home. Whoa, look at her back there. Has she ever done that?
No. She's never done that. I'm like, what is happening?
That's she knows you're talking to me. Hi, baby.
She was like crying at the door, and I'm like, okay, you can come in. Usually she's just sleeping. Okay, whatever. Cuckoo little dog. Here, I gotta make her a little bed right here so she can sit down next to me. Gotta get her blanket.
Yeah, but so yeah.
So seeing real artists in their lair.
Yeah, seeing Jamie in his house in Richmond, and it's Harold at his, and Harold and Diane taking us around, showing us all the touristy stuff, here in Virginia Beach, and basically, the city, it's kind of a crummy beach, but it has beach in the name. And coming from New England, I was like, that's a change I could welcome, and I like the idea of learning the other side of the industry, like the actual like printing side a little bit, and so I ended up moving down here. And my plan was to come down for like a year or two and help him, and then probably go back north. And that was in 2003 was when I moved here. So 18 years, almost 17 years ago, I've been here. And Harold's, he's
He's
gone.
long gone.
He left a long time ago.
He's had 12 more careers since then.
He literally has.
Literally.
So you have to do an interview series with him because it will be wonderful.
If he'll do it, I'll do it. Cause
I will make sure that he says yes. Just have to turn up his microphone a little bit.
Yes.
He's a bit of a quiet talker. But yeah. So I came down here and I helped Harold. Oh, I had made some notes of some other weird hiccups in the career that you might be interested in. Have I ever told you about noise?
No.
This is
What year is this?
I don't know.
I thought it said 98 on the front. Did it say 98?
Does it? Oh, it says fall 99. You've got a good eye. I didn't even see that. So this was published by JCPenney. And it was a fake. It's a fake magazine for teenagers. That's basically a JCPenney catalog. It's just all advertisements, but it's made to look like a magazine, and they would give them away in the stores. And this might have come from a tip from Harold, but somehow I ended up. They ran a stock boy in this magazine.
What?
And they printed this horrible high school photo of me.
Oh my God! Look at you.
And with a fake locker behind me.
Oh my God.
And this little blurb. Cartooning is this is me talking apparently. Cartooning is one of the only careers that you can start when you're 2 years old and continue for the rest of your life, says Todd, who's 17 and lives in Connecticut. All I do is take a blank sheet of paper and stare at it. My brain kind of wanders until poof, the idea pops in my head. And then they wrote, scary. So yeah, Noise Magazine happened, and this thing went to like millions.
Oh, I bet.
And it paid me a couple $100, so that was cool. As a 17-year-old, but I got deluged, like swamped with fan mail because of the stupid little picture, because of all the teeny bopper girls that read this thing. And it was like the weirdest experience of my entire life. Was like this, I just imagine the poor kids that were in like real teen magazines, so this is something, if you ever wanted to make fun of me for something in my past, Noise
Magazine.
Noise Magazine, yeah, you're the guy.
You're the guy from Noise Magazine, aren't you?
But so like JCPenney, the one at our mall, like they had me come and sign these things in the mall and stuff. It was weird. So I thought you'd get a kick out of that. So I guess that makes the Stock Boy one of the most visible comics I've ever done, really, even though nobody knows it now. But I mean, if you think about it, like that went to like millions of teenagers around the planet.
Well, that's one of those things that occurs, is you have these sort of things that happen that you have no ability to sort of exploit or to build.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't build anything off of that except like how to block emails. Like I learned how to just stop getting email. Yeah, that happened. I mean, I guess the Nickelodeon magazine stuff had a lot of visibility too. But yeah.
Now, when did you start actually having stuff in Nickelodeon magazine?
Before I moved to Virginia, because like I was at the gas station, so I was drawing.
Okay, so you were getting stuff in there.
Yeah, so like I guess early 2000s,
And I remember that check was because you must have clued me in at some point, or maybe somebody talked to me, and because I sent them some gags and they bought one or two of them, and they
awesome
paid me like $175, which
that was the gag rate. a gag panel. Yeah.
And I mean, that still goes back as one of the only times I've ever been paid.
Yeah,
Like, I've only been paid probably like 5 times in my life for anything, and
I
that
think
was
it
one
was
of them.
for like, I did some, like, here's one of my Jolly Rogers. This was like a full.
Oh,
So this was $750 for a page.
a page.
And then they had the little comics that ran on the bottom, and these they would buy in. They were $100 a strip, but they buy 8 of them at a time. So you got more for doing those. And so I did a lot of those. Like the Woodlands started as those.
Yeah, those were great.
Which I found a Woodlands one. This was like one of the original Woodlands things.
And that was always, yeah, I mean, that seemed like it was a great paycheck.
This is my buddy Dan Moynihan above me. So that was a nice, nice surprise. Always cool when you open it up and see somebody that you know, like, sharing the page. Yeah, that was fun. And I would do random every once in a while. Not super frequently, but I did some coloring work for them too. So like, here's like I colored this Rugrats comic.
Oh wow!
That was drawn by, I think, Scott Roberts. Yeah, Scott Roberts did that. Scott Roberts would have been at that party at the first SPX too. So a lot of connections there. But so yeah, then it eventually ended up helping Harold, and we did all kinds of weird jobs. Oh, I found one of our weird jobs for you too. We did we did this Dennis the Menace book. I don't know if you knew that.
Vacation special. Okay.
So this was originally published in 1961, and it's like a Dennis the Menace goes to summer camp comic, and it was like the actual camp that Dennis Ketchum went to. Like, it was like, and so they were doing this anniversary of this, and they wanted to reprint the book to give to all the campers this year. Like, this happened here, a long time ago. But the only thing that existed was like a beat up copy of the printed book from the 60s. No original art, no photostats, no anything. And it was in like muddy color. So Harold and I spent like a nightmare summer of our own, scanning and decoloring and recoloring this book. That's one of the weirder things that we did. We also did like a weird animated video for somebody, and then we helped Jimmy Gownley do his Amelia Rules stuff. You should talk to Jimmy too. He's got some crazy stories.
I can imagine. And this is how you and I met.
Yes. Because
I don't think I have one out here.
I've got Imaginary World right here. So my spinny rack back here is all comics by my friends mostly. So
so why am I on there? Oh my god. So, yeah. I always remember that was one of my proudest things ever. Was one of my buddy's kids was all into Mr. Toast, and he's still a big fan. And at one point I went over their house after he'd had that book for like 5 years. And it was thrashed to hell. Think harder. So I found Harold online, and I was like, I wanted to do a comic thing because I'd printed like my first book through a real printer, and it was the circus one. It was great, but I think I had to do like 2,500 or something. Maybe I only had to do 1,000. I don't remember now. But I wanted to do a comic book just because it seemed like that was more something you could distribute. And I contacted you guys. And now, did we talk at that point? I don't.
I didn't. Harold talked to you, and then we got your book in, and I just lost my marbles over it because we didn't do a lot of color books. It was mostly black and white stuff.
Oh, okay.
So this was one of the only color things that we got for printing. But it was so lots of the books were, amateurish at best, that we'd get. It was a lot of people dipping their toes in that wouldn't go on to do more in the, like.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And then there weren't a lot of like really interesting books coming through. We did do a lot of like the webcomic collections for like those early webcomics people like Sluggy Freelance and this weird webcomics that blew up and had these followings where they, they were able to cash in on it, and they would do these little strip collections. We printed all those strip collections for those guys. So those came through, and they had, that was kind of interesting to see. But this, when it showed up, I was just like, this is awesome. And I was just enamored with this book because it's so weird, Dan. It's just like, it's so weird. It's so weird. I love it. I mean, look at this page. Do you have this page still with the dinosaur and Joe? I didn't see that in your flip through the other day.
Oh, the thing about it is,
they're separate. You stacked them.
Yeah, each of the big panels is one of my weekly strips or daily or what, I do them 2 or 3 times a week. And then I went back through and did all the little panels to sort of have something that sort of went with them so that it would fit the page size.
Right.
So I certainly have all of the little panels, and I probably have 95% of the big panels. I might, there might be 1 or 2 big panels because one collector bought a few of them from me at one point, but that's about all I've ever. Which one do you want? The alligator?
Yeah, the alligator one is.
Oh, okay, I'll look for it.
I like them stacked up too. Like together, that's just such a great. That's just a great page. But yeah, so this the Doodlebug. Yeah, this book was just like, it was so different and cool. This what's his name? Your little stick guy.
Little Henry. Henry. Yeah. Little Henry has a few. He appeared a few times in the daily strips.
Yeah, I won't talk about Little Henry 2.0.
What? Oh, did we put Little Henry in one of our new things? I can't even remember.
Yeah,
I don't remember.
Coming back. He's been reincarnated as a turtle. I mean, he's.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
that's true. But, there's a new Little Henry coming down.
Spoilers. Spoiler warning. 3 years from now, people will see Little Henry again.
He'll be like, "Oh, he's back." Okay, so we sort of met through that, and then we met.
Harold told you how much I liked that book, I think.
Oh, okay.
And you sent me. This is another one of those Twilight Zone stories because I was pretty broke at this point in time because my apartment I was renting out like this little attic, and they were charging me a whole lot of money, and I didn't make a whole lot, so I was pretty strapped, and I had a buddy who was also equally strapped, and he had a job interview, so he had to go buy like some khakis, and I went with him to Old Navy, which is where my wife works now, but we went to Old Navy, and at this point in time, they had all like the weird stuff by the checkout line, like an assortment of non-clothes things that wasn't just candies, and they had crazy kids food, and I was looking at it and thinking this book is very much a Todd thing, and I wanted it really bad, but I was like, I'm going to be responsible and not buy it, and I put it down, and I got in the car, and my friend and I left, and we got back to my house, and I checked the mail, and I had a package, and I opened it up, and it was crazy kids food, and I was like, what is going on? I just didn't buy this book. How is it in my mailbox? Like, it makes no sense. And then I open it up, and it's autographed. And it says, Todd, if it is not sugar-coated, don't eat it. Swiggle.
That's my signature.
I know what it is now. But at the time, I'm like, who? How? What? And then I looked up in it, I saw Steve Roden and Dan Goodsell, and I didn't know who Steve was at this point at all. And I was like, Dan Goodsell. I was like, oh, that's the Mr. Toast guy. And I still didn't know how you got it, but I told Harold about it, and I guess he was like, oh, cool. I told him that you really liked his
Why
stuff.
Why did I send you that?
It must have been new. Was it new? Like, had it just come out?
probably. I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
know about
so
you.
this was 2003. So like it must
Yeah,
have been recent because
yeah,
I was
that's
um
true. Because the Barnes and Noble was probably 6 months after that came out, or a year or something. So yeah,
yeah, so it probably would have been 2004 to early 2005 maybe when this happened. And and I think you had seen something in Nickelodeon or something like you knew you had some awareness that I was doing something. And then the New York Comic Con happened.
that's
And
when I kind
that's
of understood who
that.
you were. Because we
Okay.
met. You came over because that would have been
I
2005 or something, or
yeah, like
was
early 2005. It was before my car accident, I
yeah.
think.
I think it was
2005.
2005. That's sort of and it was the first one, right?
Yeah, it was the very first New York Comic
Okay.
Con, and I went with Harold and Jimmy Gownley, and I knew that you were on the list of guests, so I made it a point to go find you and introduce myself because I knew you were a West Coast person, and I don't get over there much. Um,
Back
Especially
then.
at that time. Yeah, I mean, we did Harold and I did San Diego Comic Con in like 2004 or something. Um, so I'd been out there. I met Penn Ward. I met at that show when he was in college. I should dig.
So crazy.
I should have got that out. I have a VHS tape that Penn gave me because he was a fan of my journal comics on toddbot.com, and he was in school um, studying animation, and he gave me this videotape that has like a little drawing on it, like for Todd, and it was this cartoon he did in class called Bueno the Bear, and
Oh wow.
it is so funny, and Bueno looks a lot like uh, Finn from Adventure Time, like but as a bear instead of as a kid. Um, it is one of the funniest shorts I've ever watched. Like it's really really funny. So it's super cool that he has done all the stuff that he's done. But yeah, so I made it out there once for an earlier of that show, but I wasn't regularly going to California like we've done, like since
Like
we
we
started.
ended up doing for a
Yeah,
bunch of years.
but yeah, so I made it a point to go talk to you, and then um, fast forward a bunch. You know, it's weird. Like we keep jumping ahead and jumping
Yeah,
back.
yeah, yeah.
Um, if we're talking about how we started doing the books, we jump ahead to like 2009 maybe, when you were wanting to do a superhero Mr. Toast, and you asked
What?
yeah, it was before you drew the one that you drew, but because you did a superhero book,
But
right? Like
I think I did that after. I think I did
yeah,
that after we'd started working together on the Mr.
yeah, it
Toast
came out
comics.
later on, but like that was your original idea, was you wanted to do like a one-off, like well actually at first you said I'm interested in doing a comic that's not Mr. Toast, would you want to draw it? Because you had been
Okay.
at this point in my life, after 2008, like the economy tanked and I lost all my freelance work, which was how I was surviving. It's like Nickelodeon
Mhm.
magazine folded, and like anybody that had been paying me money to draw stuff was gone, and I ended up getting day jobs again, and just getting the steam kicked out of me, and I kind of dropped off and stopped doing comics that people were seeing. Like I stopped going to shows because I didn't have anything to show. You know, I was working at Gap and hating life, and you would periodically buy art from me on like Etsy or something.
You were selling all these great little drawings on Etsy
Oh, look at
that
yeah,
I just loved.
and they were like $5.
Beautiful lamp one, and you'd list them, and I would always, go through them, and I'd be like, oh, I'll buy this one, and the price was so reasonable,
five
and I
dollars.
I, I just loved them, and I think what happened was then in 2009, I like gave you like $100 or something.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, so
You did this
you
little
were
sketchbook.
you were like an angel investor because I was like so hating life and miserable and poor, and
Oops.
yeah, you would just throw me money and be like, draw stuff.
Yeah, but you did. I remember I sent you $100, and you sent me. Maybe I even sent you this book. I don't even remember. And
No,
you
that's
sent me
what I
back.
had.
What?
You sent me like $100, and we're like, just like fill up a little sketchbook.
Or maybe I just said draw whatever you want and send it to me.
Mm-hmm.
And you just sent me this book, and it blew my mind. It really blew my mind
I haven't seen
because
this since then. Oh, look at that little guy. That was a toy I used to have, like a bobblehead.
yeah, it's what yeah, and the woodlands. And this little book just, it was everything I liked because I used to do like little tiny drawings like this when I was in college. And it was funny and it was sweet and just every page was Mr. McNifty. It appealed to my sensibilities, but it also like said to me that you're like, I mean, I don't like ever saying it this way, but you're like a real artist. I'm an artist also, but I'm more of like a character artist and a, joke artist. I knew at that after getting this and looking at it, I was like, you were the guy that could help me like create a world. And I had a world and it was sketched out in my brain, but I knew that sort of working with you was gonna take that to the next level.
Man, well, thank you. And I from seeing this, I knew that our brains were on the same frequency. It just like I've told you this before, but you and Harold are two of those people that like changed my trajectory in ways that like I can't even say. So it's very fortuitous coming together.
And we're going to get to the Mr. Toast comics and a lot of other comics that you've done in these sort of years after our meeting. But the Mr. Toast comics are the thing that I am most proud of that I've done with Mr. Toast. So I will pay you that compliment because it is from my heart. And we've seen that. We've seen that when I put them out in the world, when you put them out into the world, people respond to those comics.
Yeah. Oh, I have an example of that happening right. So I sent you that clip my buddy in Texas had of like his kid reading. I threw them in with an order of his. And then the kid's slightly older brother or younger brother threw him in the toilet and like ruined him. And so like the kid was devastated that his Mr. Toast comics were thrown in the toilet. But I got this from him the other day. So here you go, world. This is a kid reacting to getting.
Hold up, center.
What is that? That's Mr. Onion Book. Mr. Onion Book.
That was the one where Mope sells out.
Chasing Fame. Okay, we're gonna call it. We're gonna call episode 2 here, and then in episode 3, well, you're just gonna have to come back and see what happens in episode 3, right?
Good stuff. So in part 3, we're going to really dig into our Mr. Toast collaboration because the Mr. Toast comics really were a collaboration between Todd and me in the best way. He was taking my characters, I was writing the stories, and he was doing amazing art, and then also adding in other visual things that really added to the stories. So check it out later. It'll be coming up real soon.